Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Lynne Segall. Today's topic: a consultant turned professor discusses the B School curriculum. Now, Lynn is the Associate Dean at the Goizueta Business School at Emory University, where she is also an associate professor in the practice of organization and management. I can't believe I got through that whole sentence. Previously, she worked for a number of years at Accenture in a variety of consulting and talent leadership roles, including the Director of Talent and Organization Offering Development, which is a super long business card, probably. She has designed and worked on a specific class for Emory, which focuses on how to be a leader and exert influence. Two traits critical to the CMO position. Full disclosure, our paths crossed a number of years ago while Lynn was at Accenture and I was at Best Buy. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Mike. It's great to be here.
Great to see you. So let's start with a quick overview of the B School landscape today. Are companies getting the raw talent they need, and are students ready for the workforce?
I think companies are getting great talent across the business school landscape. Students are, when I see with my students, they come to business school motivated, they want a career change, they're looking to grow in their careers, and they dig pretty deep to work hard in business school to prepare themselves for their career post MBA. The landscape is challenging, though. I'm in my 9th academic year. I've seen, I'm seeing this move through the generations. So we've moved, when I first started teaching, it was largely millennials in the classroom. Now it's largely Gen Z. And I think the different generations show up in different ways. And even the way they engage with the course material and how they think about their careers and how they think about their lives is even shifting a little bit.
So we'll talk about that in a minute. I have an overarching question. We've had a bunch of academics on the show. Is the B School model keeping up with the marketplace? I mean, there's so much change in the marketplace, so much new technology, big data, and everything. And when you look at academics, it's not the fastest changing area in general, not Emory or anything in specific, but is the B School curriculum overall across the U.S. keeping up with the marketplace?
It's an interesting question because I think back to, I think yes and no. There's so much change happening with technology. You look at artificial intelligence, and just Chat GPT in and of itself has changed how we've thought about even testing. And some professors are going back to handwritten tests just so that you can get into the mind of the student. In the individual classes, I think professors are innovating really at all schools, looking at how can you integrate these technologies in new and different ways and stay current. Looking at trends in the different disciplines. This is a podcast about marketing. There are all kinds of trends. Think about social media and the impact of social media on marketing compared to when I was in business school. It didn't even exist. We barely had the internet. So I think it is happening in the electives. I don't know how much is happening in the core curriculum. And I don't know if it needs to. The core curriculum in any business school is really focused on the discipline of business. And the core disciplines stay the same. The technologies shift. What I think is more challenging in business schools is how you focus on the content that is less tangible, the content that is more around problem solving and communication, the leadership skills, and how you figure out how to make things happen and make an impact in an organization. Those things are harder to teach. they're harder to see. And students value the technical skills because that's tangible and that's what they think they need, because they don't have the perspective of what it takes to be influential or what it takes to make an impact in an organization.
So I'm going to come back to the students in a minute, but I do think probably now is a good time to talk about the two classes you teach, because they are different than a lot of classes people can take in business school. They're all about, I think, context and influence. Why don't you tell us about them? And then also, and then we could talk about like how the students are reacting to them and how hard it is to get this new curriculum into the universities.
Sure. So the two classes I teach, one is a required course in the first term in the 2-year full-time program, in the first term of their MBA. So in this first term, they're getting all the traditional classes you would expect to get in an MBA program: your marketing class, your finance class, your accounting class, your data class, data analysis or statistics decision-making class, an operations class, et cetera, econ, strategy. And then they take my class, and my class is focused on structured problem solving, influential communication, and how you lead and organize the work of a problem solving team. So essentially, it's how do you figure it out and get it done class. And I'm bringing the toolkit from management consulting into the MBA classroom, but making it broadly applicable for all students, regardless of where they head after business school.
And this is a really big deal, because very rarely do you ever get in any management job, but surely in marketing, a thing where you're in total control of any big project across the company. You have to enlist a lot of people. Tell me, how do you teach this thing?
It's very hands-on. So I have an approach to structured problem solving that I co-developed with my predecessor, the person who was in my role before me. And it's basically a 7-step process for problem solving. Step 1, define the problem. Step 2, break down the problem. Step 3, plan the work. Step 4, work the plan. Step 5, build the case for change. And step 6, make the case. And then step 7 is all about starting the change, preparing the organization for the change. But I teach it all through hands-on practice, because
you give them real cases.
In the fall, it's real cases, it's in-class activities, it's homework assignments. There's a 6-week project around a case where they have to go do research in the library and they have to synthesize. And it's really kind of capstone. You have to pull in the analytics and the frameworks that you're learning in your other functional disciplinary classes. There's a lot of stand up and deliver and presentation and feedback. So it's super hands-on. It's the only way to learn it. I like to say the only way through is through. You know, I'm teaching my 15-year-old daughter how to drive a car. I can show her the gadgets in the car, and I can take her to a parking lot and she can drive up and down a few rows. But would I put her on the highway? No. And the same is true with the problem solving. You can understand it conceptually very quickly, but the only way you can really build the skills and the muscle is through repetition, practice. And so we build in our curriculum multiple opportunities for repetition. And then in the spring semester, they work on a project for an organization, a real project, a real problem for an organization over the course of a semester.
And then your second class.
So my second class is related to the spring semester, but these are second-year MBA students. Right. Who are coaching first-year MBA teams. So the teams that are doing those projects. So my second class is called Coaching a Problem-Solving Team. And it's all about how do you facilitate the problem-solving process? How do you be an effective coach? And how do you effectively manage clients and stakeholders? So those are really what the 3 learning objectives are in my spring class.
So when at least I look at the marketing job, these are skills almost every marketer needs to get anything through a company, which is you have to build a coalition, you have to do this. How come classes like this aren't springing up all over?
I think they exist in different schools and different formats, but here's the challenge. The faculty hiring model in MBA schools is tied to the functional disciplines. You go get a PhD in marketing, and then you go teach you become a marketing professor. You get a PhD in finance, you become a finance professor. There's no one really getting a PhD in problem solving. And there might be some PhDs in communication. So sometimes you'll see a class just focused on communication, but the communication has to be integrated with the problem solving. Otherwise, it becomes showmanship. And so there's not really a faculty hiring model. There's not a functional discipline in the school, and in the schools where people like me sit. I mean, at Emory, I sit in the organization and management disciplinary area. But the class I teach is cross-cutting because it cuts across all the disciplines. We have marketing projects, operations projects, et cetera. So there's a hiring issue to begin with. And then a lot of people, I mean, there's a mix in our faculty, and I'm sure this is true everywhere, of research-based faculty who are the traditional tenure track faculty and clinical faculty. And the not all faculty have decades of work experience in the real world, but they're steeped in really knowledgeable in the theories. And you have to have the real world work experience to have credibility in delivering this kind of content, because the students are cynical.
This is such a great discussion point. Let's talk about it a little bit. First, I want to clear up, make sure all our listeners know what showmanship means, because I took it to mean that just means you can put a good communication glossy on top of some concept, but you can't actually get the organization to execute anything. Is that fair?
That's perfect. That's exactly. Okay. And you might be great at delivering it, but there also might not be a lot of substance behind it. There's no substitute for doing the work. You have to do the work. But if you just do a class on communication, it ends up just being about style and not about the content. And effective communication is the integration of style and content.
Well, and the other thing, effective management is doing something that matters to the marketplace, not talking about theory or even the PR around it. Like right. we had a previous guest on, because Jim Stengel, who was the CMO of Procter, and he said the CMO job, the chief marketing officer job, is 90% chief and 10% marketing. But you just said business schools are organized around functions like right. marketing or finance or operations or communications. How is that, and why? You can't really, in my mind, be a very good CMO or CEO or in a lot of functions a C if you're not really good at leadership. How come? And I want to go back to your two classes, but also this concept of teaching how to get stuff done versus teaching theory and tactics. How come this isn't catching on more? And what do you hear from companies that come in and students after they've been out in the marketplace a little bit on what's missing in academics? That's a super long question, but it's really about how come we're not teaching more C and less function?
The teaching more C is hard. We call it the softer skills, but they're actually the harder skills. They're the harder skills to develop, and they're the harder skills to teach. Everyone comes into this kind of content with their priors. I know how I show up. I've developed a pattern, ways of working. The average MBA in the full-time program has 5.5 to 6 years of experience. They've already developed habits and ways of being and ways of thinking. They've got mindsets that are sometimes informed even through their family systems growing up. So you come into a program, and any kind of leadership development curriculum forces them to look at how they show up and they're not ready. So it's hard.
Why aren't they ready? Because they've made this big choice to usually spend a bunch of money, drop out of the workforce, reboot their career, go to business school. Why aren't they ready?
Because if you think about what they're going to do right after business school, they're not going to be the chief. They're going to be the marketer. And so they're focused, it's like that, it's like that analogy of only being able to see as far as your headlights.
Yeah.
And that's not a criticism per se. It's just human nature. They're looking at their first job out, maybe their second job out. They can't see out across that horizon yet. And I try to talk about that. I talk about these skills being craft skills that you build through repetition over time, through practice and coaching and feedback. But the good news is they're forever skills. They're the right. skills that have no expiration date. So that's the hook I try to give them. But the tangible skills I didn't know what an NPV was, or I didn't know what the 4 Ps of marketing were or whatever.
Right.
And now I know them. I can touch and feel that. That's something I didn't know. And now I know it. The knowledge stuff is easier to quantify as progress. And then from a teaching perspective, when you've got a big class, I'll have 60 people in a section, everybody's at a different place. And
Yeah.
especially with something like leadership, we can teach concepts of leadership, but to really change behavior,
Yeah.
you need the one-on-one, you need the coaching, you need the feedback, sometimes you need the wet blanket or the ice bucket challenge on your head as a wake-up call. And that's really hard to scale.
So how do you evaluate the students in the class in terms of how they're doing, and how do they know how do you give them an ice bucket or bonk on the head or whatever you want to call it, and says your leadership style isn't working? Like, what are some tips?
Well, it happens in my class, in the spring class, in 2 different ways. I hire executive coaches. And so every student in my class has an executive coach that they work with over the course of the semester. So that's somebody that now I'm not grading them on what happens in that relationship with the executive coach. That's private.
Right.
The executive coach just lets me know, did they do the things they were supposed to do? Did they attend the meetings? Did they come prepared? Did they engage? But I don't learn about what the private nature of their work together was. And then they have reflection papers and some other activities that they turn in for me. It's an academic class, so I have to have some form of measurement. I just graded the mid-semester reflections over the last couple of weeks. And what I was looking for was a depth of transparency and honesty and true reflection about what they were seeing. And I was looking for some vulnerability. Where did they notice that they had opportunities, and were they taking actions to do something about it? And then I gave them feedback, often in the form of questions. Have you thought about this? How are you going to deal with that? This sounds like an interesting challenge. What are your next steps for how you're going to address this issue in your team, or what have you? So more from a coaching perspective than here's your letter grade.
But so one, I think that's super valuable. And I've had a bunch of companies, I know it doesn't show, but give me executive coach. And I found that some of the best training you could get, because it was additional reflection and also a free zone where someone could tell you what you were really doing wrong without a big penalty. And you could make mistakes with the coach and not in the marketplace. That I thought was super helpful. When you talk to companies and then when you talk to students that have left and been out there a couple of years, what do they say they wish business schools were teaching? My guess is it's probably more of your class, but what do they wish the students had more of? Not that they're not great, not that they're not coming out, but if students and companies out there that are hiring now could put a couple things into B schools, what would they put in?
The reason we have my fall class is because recruiters said, you're not just Emory students, but MBA students in general are coming out of business school, steeped in the theory of business, but then we have to teach them how to do anything once they get here. And
before you go on, tell us about this. This is based on some massive study you did, right?
Not us, but there was a book that came out in the mid 2000s called Rethinking the MBA. And it was 3 business school professors, I think Harvard, Yale, and I forget now where the 3rd professor was. And they did the study. And then I think I wasn't at Goizueta at the time that we were developing this, the early versions of this course, but that I think we did our own research from recruiters and heard similar things. We also heard, and this is reflected in that book as well. There's some really powerful quotes in the book about how MBA students couldn't communicate their way out of a box. And so our faculty took that very seriously and incorporated that into the curricular reform of the time and built that into the curriculum. And we hear that from recruiters now, that those are the skills that differentiate one MBA student from another once they get in. What I hear back from alums when I get the messages in LinkedIn or in my email are that they felt prepared beyond the things that they learned in their traditional MBA classes. I have a student and a former student at UPS, and she went in and I don't remember exactly the details, but there were some research reports that she would receive, and then there was a standard way of synthesizing it and reporting it up, and there was like many, many pages. And she looked at it and she thought, this doesn't seem very effective, and it doesn't seem like anyone's paying attention to this. She synthesized it into a one-pager and shared that back. And it was so powerful that the CMO's chief of staff reached out to her and said, we really like the way you did this. Can you help us with these other things? And then that progressed. And then eventually she became the CMO's chief of staff. And she's progressed further. And she connects that back to some of the core things that she learned in my class about communication. So that's pretty cool.
But that is theory. I've also personal experience. Companies very rarely can move on theory. And also the closer you get to the actual sale and the customer, the less the theory matters and the more the execution matters. Or at least that's been my experience. How come this and things like sales classes or AI classes and big data classes, how come, and then this collaboration that you're really envisioning here in your class and context and influence, how come there's not an explosion of these classes right now across B schools?
It's a great question. I do think it goes back to what I already said. It's really hard to teach and it's really hard to scale. I have 26 students this spring in my class, and there's a lot of hands-on. There's, the coaches or whatever, there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
And, so not all of our students are getting it. 26 students are getting it.
Yeah.
And so the scale, and, if you look at some of the bigger MBA programs that have 800, 900 students,
tough.
I think scale is the challenge, and it's hard, and it's so individual and so personal.
Yeah.
And so you can scale the theory all day long.
You can't. But then what you're seeing is an explosion of AI companies. When you go back and look at the MarTech stack, when that really started, explosion of companies and the speed of the marketplace building up the competency. And then when I personally look back on what B schools are actually training, that explosion of competency, there is a good explosion of theory behind it, but not an explosion of executional teaching.
I know.
That's just my opinion. But
yeah.
But when you're working with marketers, the theory of how to apply this is it's helpful, but it doesn't move anything, because the complexity of applying these things is where you get hung up. And that's where, in my mind, a lot of CMOs get hung up.
Yeah.
It's the execution of the theory.
Yeah, I will say I participate in a group of peers of people like me at business schools all over the country, and even some schools outside of the U.S. We get together every summer. The organization is called LEAP, Leaders of Experiential Project-Based Education. And experiential learning, project-based learning is expanding. If you look at what has happened, 20 years ago, Emory, we had experiential learning at Goizueta. Michigan had experiential learning. UCLA had experiential learning as a formal part of the curriculum.
Right.
But most other schools did not. That is not true today. Today, every school in the top 20 and even the top 30 probably has at least one or two electives that are project-based learning or experiential learning. Action learning would be another terminology that's sometimes used, term of art. The difference is not all schools are requiring it for everybody. Right. That's where I think the explosion needs to happen. I think it should be required for everybody, because the theory is important, but as you say, the practice is everything. And this is the part I want my students to understand, is the way to really accelerate career readiness is to get the reps in, to get the practice in. And that's some of what I hear back. Like I got a note, I think last year, from a former student who was at a consulting firm. And he said, the bench is really full right now. That's the terminology in consulting for people aren't staffed. And he said, the bench is really full right now and very few people are getting staffed because the market is soft. But I got staffed as a new hire because I was able to tell the story of how experienced I was. And that's thanks to the programs that you led. That was pretty cool.
This is one, we talked to a lot of companies with the show, and I've talked to a lot of companies in my career. A lot of them they wait for the MBA to get baked somewhere else and get that experience in them before they hire them, because they want the MBA, but they don't want to. And I'll say something, I don't know if you'll agree with it, but the thing is, theory is something you can always get. I can go buy theory, I can rent it, I can hire consultants to bring in the theory. It's the execution that makes the company win or not. And so I think I'm glad to hear you say that we're making good progress and that this should be explosion. I think that is where I would see the biggest win, and also having managed a bunch of MBAs or watching them come out, it's interesting. That once they're baked a little bit and they realize that it's a lot about the C, it's not about the M. They're better.
Can we go back to the students for a second? Because I think
wanted to do that. I want to go back to the different generation and the students and what's
well, I think it's actually related to the conversation about why aren't more business schools doing this? And the part of the problem is the challenge is the faculty model. And part of the challenge is the students resist it. The students come in skeptical. Like I said, they have their priors, they have their ways of working. Right. And if you think about how do you get into a top business school, you've already been successful. So you have some data.
Right. Already your habits have been reinforced that you are amazing.
You've got some, amazing. Yes. Yeah. And so what I teach blows some people's worlds, and it's hard. It's hard to really define what problem do we need to solve, and not just in your head, but to write it down, because clear writing reflects clear thinking. And so it's hard. And when they get tough feedback, some students lean into that and go deeper. And some students say, it's not me, it's you. And
and this is why you wait to buy a baked MBA instead of a brand new one. Because look, you can talk all you want about the theory of how you hit the fastball. If I want to make a baseball analogy, you can understand all that theory about hitting, and you can study it, and you can understand how the best hitters hit. But in the end, you have to actually be able to hit the fastball.
Right.
And one of the things that you can see sometimes, I'm not painting everybody with the same brush, is there's a bunch of people that come out thinking, because they understand the theory of how to hit the fastball, that is what the company needs, is the theory. But the company doesn't need that. They need to know how to hit it.
Right. And just one other thing I was thinking about with the students is a lot of them, our students are varied backgrounds. We've got veterans, we've got folks who were Teach for America, we've got engineers, we've got people who worked in finance roles, accountants, you name it. And a lot of them come in with maybe the possible exception of the veterans, who usually have some sort of leadership or managerial experience, especially if they, went through office or candidate school and, had different, posts where they had to lead big teams. But a lot of my students have been individual contributors. So when they were knocking it out of the park, someone else was defining the problem for them, and they were given a work stream, and then they just went. But when they're left with complete ambiguity, like I'm teaching in the first year, when they get into their internships, sometimes the internship might be like, say they're working for a marketing organization. We got to figure out this omni-channel thing, or we need to go digital. That's your project for the summer. And that's all they get.
Right.
That's when they start appreciating, wow, now I have a way through. Now I know where to start. Okay, let me just start. What was that define the problem thing she was talking about? Let me start by defining the problem. And then they actually pulled out their textbook that I wrote with my co-author, and they pull that out, and then they start going through the steps. And that's when I start getting emails in the middle of summer like, I'm so glad.
This is such a important thing for people that want to get to the C-suite, which is when you change jobs and you come in, no one gives you a to-do list. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do they give you a to-do list. What they do is they give you a situation. Mm-hmm. And they say, here's what it would look like if this situation could be solved. Why don't you figure it out?
Yeah, that's the mantra of my class. Figure it out. You're going to be told all the time, I don't know, you go figure it out.
Yes, like, look, when our paths crossed, when I was at Best Buy, my whole thing was, they were like, look, we want a marketing department and a brand thing and all this other stuff, and we got all these parts. That's it.
Figure it out.
Yeah, that's it. And there's no list, and I could not come to the company and go, here's the theory.
Right. You have to know what questions to ask. So
and you have to say, and here's the action steps that will start us down the journey. Mm-hmm. Here's how I will measure it, and here's how I will bring you along. And if you were doing any of the showmanship thing, you'd look terrible in the company, because they want action that they can see and feel. They don't want theory that they can hear about. Right.
That's all fluff and no stuff. I got a bunch of those. Another one is all hat and no cattle.
I know. I was just reaching for that in my head. All hat and no cattle.
Or my other favorite one is all box and no cereal. I like that one too.
All box and no cereal is great. Yeah. So we're almost at time here. So I have a 2-part question here for you.
I'm ready.
Show. You can take one or both, but you have to take at least one. Practical advice for our audience, which is, all marketing agency folks, but an awful lot of other business people. Practical advice we haven't discussed yet, and or the funniest story you can share on the air. You can take both of those or one. Your choice.
I'm game. I'll take both. The practical advice is simple. It's one of the principles I teach my students. Be intentional. Everything you do benefits from intention. Whether it's as simple as, what am I going to do in this meeting, or how am I going to lead this group of people, to choices you make in your life. Be intentional. That's my practical advice. The funny story actually is from when I was a business student. I had 2 interviews on the same day, and one of the companies was a second interview, and I was worried. I don't know why I thought this, but I was worried that I only had one suit, because I was a poor business student. So I'd gone to the mall the night before to get a new suit, and I was all excited to wear this new suit. It looked great. I get to campus for my interview, and it was cold. It was February or January or something. So I had a coat on. I'm sitting in the little breakout room. I take off my coat. The guy comes to interview me. So he has to meet me in this one room, and we have to walk down this hall to where the interview room is. And we're walking down the hall, and he kind of looks behind me. And I'm thinking, why is he looking at my backside? This is rude. And he said, "What's that?" And I turn around, and on the back of my suit, on the back of my navy suit, is a white security tag. And he says, "Do you always steal your suits for your interviews?"
No.
I kid you not. And I am just like at first I couldn't figure out what it was. Like, it looked like a gob of masking tape or something. I'm like, what is that? And I'm like, oh my God, it's the security tag. And so we get to the interview room, and I am just, 3 shades of red and whatever. Yeah. And we are laughing, and, we just laughed about it. And then we kind of got calmed down, and it was a case interview. It was a consulting firm, and I nailed the case interview. And then I had to go to the second interview, because it was like back-to-back interviews this was the same company still. Yeah, but and so I get out in the hallway, and my friend who was in the other room is waiting to swap. And he sees me, and I say, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what happened." And he's already laughing. I'm like, "Why are you laughing?" Well, I was wearing a skirt, And the skirt was a little bit loose. So when I walked, it had like shifted around. So the vent in the back was in the front by my knees. And it had the big X. Like, in men's suits, how the
Yes.
vents on this jacket have the stitched X. So I had a big giant X on my skirt in the front. So we quickly cut that off before my next interview. But I had to go to the mall between campus and going to the other company where I had the second interview to get the security tag removed, but it was pretty humiliating. I did get the job with the consulting firm. I did work there that summer, and it's made a great story ever since.
It is. And it's also not a recommended icebreaker, but really quite the icebreaker. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And the lesson is it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it.
Yes.
And so I love that lesson.
I think that is a great way to end the show. Thanks, Lynn, for joining us. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. If you are enjoying the show, hit the like button and subscribe. And look for all of our shows on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include Marketing, the battle between believers and non-believers. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. A search perspective on marketing. The Jim Stengel interview on what it takes to be a successful CMO, and is the CMO position the hardest job in business? Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.